All right, welcome again to the Gain Service Academy Mission podcast. I am Colonel Rob Kirkland, and we have Trish Dock with us. Captain Trish Dock, how you doing, Trish?
Doing great. Excited to talk about teacher evaluations. How were
Yes.
your teacher evaluations, sir? Do you know?
I don't know. That's the whole thing is that you don't, one of the things you just don't know when you're sending evaluations to teachers, you don't know what questions they're asking. What is it that they're going to be asking my teachers? Are they going to ask them how well I'm doing in calculus? I don't think I would have gotten a very good evaluation for that. Some other thing, if they asked for history, I'd probably do pretty good on that, but not necessarily calculus. I think I did okay in teacher evaluations, but you never know. You really don't know. How about you?
I have no idea either, and I think that's what we're here today to shed light on is what questions and how are you going to be evaluated? So exactly what you need to be doing now in class to give you the are you being the student that you should be in class based on the questions that are going to be asked about you. I don't think most people realize that it's more or less a survey. It's not really a letter of recommendation. It's a list of questions that you're rated on.
Yeah, and almost all the questions don't have anything to do with the subject that the teacher is teaching. So you'd think if they're going to have this evaluation for your English teacher that they'd be asking, how well does Johnny write? But we know that's not the way it is. They do ask a couple of questions like that, okay, to be fair. But the rest of the questions are questions that have nothing to do with how well Johnny writes. It has everything to do with all the other things that the academies find to be important in evaluations. So if the English teacher is asking to rate Johnny on a bunch of different things that aren't have nothing to do with writing English, what in your mind does that mean?
Well, they're thinking about what qualities are going to make a successful officer, not only successful, but an officer who legitimately takes care of their people and is advancing the mission of whichever branch of service you're serving in. So it's not how good of a writer you are or how good of a mathematician you are, but how good of a person. Do you stick to your commitments? Are you a good communicator? Do you have all of the elements necessary to lead?
Right. And I think that, and if the teacher doesn't know these things, you have to let the teacher know that you have these qualities, which is I think we're going to come back to in this podcast and this YouTube video. But to me, my English teacher didn't know how good of a leader I was necessarily. But I think it might have been helpful ahead of time if I told my English teacher that I knew that if I knew that he or she was going to evaluate me on leadership, it might be nice for me to tell him in advance, Mrs. Jones, I know you haven't seen my leadership in this class, but I'm the captain of the cross country team, and I've led my team to get better at running or something like that. So then your teacher knows that you are demonstrating leadership, even though they may not know that in class. It's understanding what you're being evaluated on, but I think also telling your teachers or coaching your teachers and making sure that they understand maybe the gaps in the knowledge in their knowledge of you, because not all teachers know who the heck you are.
Especially when there's high schools with large classes and you kind of get lost in the mix. But I think one of the best ways to help your teacher learn about you comes back to your resume. So maybe a lot of students think that they're going to have all their extracurriculars in the application, and so they don't need a resume. But I strongly disagree. I think every student that's applying to Service Academy needs a resume. Not only can you give it to your liaison officer before you interview with them, you can give it to your teacher before they're writing this evaluation or your letters of recommendation for the folks that you're asking to do that. So it's something that you can help them kind of, oh yes, that's right, Johnny is the captain of the lacrosse team. Okay, now I remember that. I remember him talking about that one time in class, or whatever the case may be.
I thought all our teachers were mind readers. Okay. All right, so let's go through it. So why don't you go ahead and kick this off with the Naval Academy here. Don't ask
Sure,
me why
sure.
we're asking for the Naval Academy first. I mean, I guess we have to do the academy you and I didn't go to first. That's okay.
That's
But
right.
I like the Navy people too. What we're going to see is a lot of similar trends here. What are the evaluations and recommendations for the Naval Academy? What are they looking for, particularly on the survey?
For the Naval Academy, it's very similar to Air Force Academy in that they want teachers from 11th and 12th grade. And we can kind of guess as to why that is, but most likely it's because they want to see how you're doing in your advanced classes. They want to see how you're doing in your pre-calculus and your calculus and your advanced math. And so that's why they require a math and an English teacher evaluation. And a lot of students ask, am I going to be able to see what they submit? And the answer is no. What's going to happen for all the service academies is once the application, the second half of the application opens up, there will be a place for you to input your teacher's name, their phone number, their email address, and they'll get an email, and the survey will be emailed directly to them. You will never see what is in the contents of that survey. So, some of the questions that they'll be asked are they'll be asked to rank you to strongly agree or strongly disagree. And they'll ask, do you gain respect of your peers? Are you influencing other students to work together? Are you demonstrating personal integrity? Do you communicate effectively in face to face discussion? Do you communicate effectively in written work? And so they're going to ask about 14 to 15 questions along those lines. And those are the questions that you need to be thinking about now. How good of a communicator are you? Do you accept criticism and do you make improvements from it? Are you able to adjust to a demanding schedule of activities without neglecting your schoolwork? Do you make friends easily? These are all questions that your teacher is going to be asked. Do you persist when you're solving problems or do you just give up? And do you demonstrate intellectual curiosity? So it's a very quick survey, right? They can just go down the line and say strongly agree, strongly disagree. Now, it's really important that most people, when they're applying, they're at the very end of their 11th grade year or they've already completed their 11th grade year. If you don't have a good relationship with your 11th grade teacher, it's going to be incumbent upon you to get to know your 12th grade teacher very quickly because there is this limitation in place, right? They want a math or an English teacher from 11th or 12th grade. So that's a limiting factor. So, students who are now sophomores or they're going into junior year or you're in the beginning of your junior year, the opportunity is yours to make a good impression with your teachers and to develop that good relationship now. Now, at the end, they're going to have the opportunity to write a little bit about you. And so they're going to ask, how would you rate the student's overall performance and potential among all that you have taught? So, how do you compare to every other student they've ever taught? And that's a really big question. And sir, do you have any thoughts about that question?
Yeah, I think that, well, again, I think this might go back to coaching the teacher if you can. What I believe that the students should do is sit down with the teacher and if they can. In other words, before they send them, first of all, they should tell the teacher what the questions are going to be. And then I think they should sit down with the teacher for a little bit and kind of talk about each one of these along with talking about their resume. I don't, you should never send in my opinion, you should never send these things to the teacher just blindly where they don't, where you haven't talked to them, you haven't worked out any sort of maybe misunderstanding or maybe some things that they don't really understand about you. So what I visualize is that what you should do is you should have these questions in front of you, sit down with the teacher and go through each one of them and speak to them about each one of these areas that they're looking at. So to get at your question, when we look at this section, it's really would be great if they could somehow give some sort of rating to you. In other words, this is the top 10% of students that I have taught in my English class, or out of the 50 students I've been teaching this year, Jimmy would be in the top 5% or something like that. So what you can do is you can recommend to the teacher if somehow they could put a number to this, because then that really gives a good indication to the academies of where this person ranks. And I think it also kind of aligns more with what the way that the military does evaluations, in that they require that there's an enumeration. So if you can somehow also get your teacher to enumerate that, I think that's helpful.
Yeah, as long as you're in the military, you're going to be ranked. And so you might as well start now, right?
Right, exactly. And some teachers are, they may be hesitant to do that. So you may not be able to force it too much. with your teacher. But
Especially if you're not in the top 10% or they're not in the top 50%, right? You want to be very careful about asking for that.
yeah, or if you're in a really high achieving school, you then mention talk to the teacher about, well, maybe it's good to caveat this with the fact that this school is one of the top schools in our city, and we have outstanding students in the class that go on to top schools in the country. So it's kind of one of those mitigating things where if they're not going to rank you, then perhaps they can
Explain it a little bit.
explain the situation a little bit more regard to that thing. So I mean, this has to be done with care. I don't think you can force it on the teacher, but in my opinion, you and the teacher need to sit down and do this and at least have a quick meeting on this. And I think the best, well, it can be done at any time, but I think certainly before you send this thing to the teacher.
Definitely ask at least, can we sit down? Are you willing to write me an evaluation or letter of recommendation? Or don't just input their information.
Right, exactly. Don't input it and just blast it off and then
Yeah.
leave it. I mean, and
And
so
and
that,
here's a key factor, especially with Navy and Air Force. As soon as you input their name and you click save on that application, that person's going to get an email. So don't assume that just because you haven't submitted your application does not mean that that person's not going to get an email saying Johnny's requesting that you evaluate him in English.
right. That's really important to know. And West Point's a little bit different in that you can put the name in and then you can submit it later to the teacher. So that's a little bit different for West Point. But yeah, absolutely. It's that kind of laying that foundation and the preparation for this. We've run into some candidates during this time that during COVID, their teacher wasn't able to observe them. And I don't think that's going to be taking place forward from here. But what if you're in a situation where your teacher hasn't looked at you very well, or you just don't have a good relationship with your teacher or your teachers? Your 11th grade math teacher's a dud.
Yeah, that's going to change. I mean, you're right that people are people, right? And sometimes you might be the best student, but your teacher and you just don't have a good relationship for whatever reason. Or maybe you didn't take English your 11th grade year for some reason. Or so you have two options here. When there's mitigating circumstances, I would email admissions and I would ask the question, can I have this person write me an evaluation instead? However, most of the time that's not really going to be the option that we recommend. I would recommend that you get into 12th grade and you establish a relationship with your 12th grade teacher. However, the consideration for that is that that's going to delay your application a little bit because now you're at least waiting until August, September, October, November, one of those months, and you get into 12th grade and you form that relationship with your teacher. So, I mean, it's if you think about it, if you start back in senior year in August and you're asking in August for a recommendation, that person's known you for 3 weeks. That's really not a lot of time to so it's very important that you're very active in class and that you're immediately establish that good relationship. What are your thoughts, sir?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a tough one. If you're like in a school, I was in a school about 450 people in my graduating class. And when you're a student who's applying to a service academy, generally the English teachers know you, all the English teachers know you, all the math teachers know you, all the science teachers. By the time you get to 11th grade, you're one of the top students. They know you, and all the teachers in the department know you. So the other thing, while it's not exactly the way that the academy wants, you may consider having having the evaluation be a team approach where you maybe have the head of the math department work on the evaluation in conjunction with your 11th grade teacher. So you
Mhm.
kind of have a team approach where maybe the head of the department, the head of the math department, writes your evaluation with input from your 11th grade teacher. So you kind of have that combination there where you're still going by the letter of what the academy wants, but on the other hand, you're avoiding to a degree an evaluation from somebody who's not going to give you a truly good evaluation.
Very true. Very, very
So
good
that's
point.
an option. So you have to kind of tread that carefully. If you really ask the academy directly, they would probably say just you got to have an 11th grade teacher. The last thing you want to do is you don't want to give it to somebody who's going to be giving you a bad evaluation if you don't think you deserve it. So there's ways around it where I think you can work within the letter of what the academies are expecting you to do.
Yeah, and hopefully you're thinking about these things before you start your junior year. We don't want to tell you to only do well in your math and English class, blow off all the other classes, or don't treat those teachers with respect. That's not what we're saying. I mean, just be the person that you think that an officer should be, and most likely you'll do okay on these evaluations.
Exactly. So now we've got for other. The Air Force Academy has an other, which is junior ROTC, counselor, principal, chemistry, physics, or other teacher from 11th and 12th grade. And USMA has a kind of like a gym teacher. But let's talk about Air Force Academy and any thoughts about who that other should be? JROTC, counselor, principal.
They actually rank their requested, so they give you an order that they prefer, and it's in that order. So JROTC instructor is first. If you're in JROTC, now that doesn't apply for a lot of people. So that's why next comes counselor, then principal, then either chemistry or physics from 11th or 12th grade, and then another teacher from 11th or 12th grade. Now, I really don't recommend another teacher unless you have awful relationships with every single person that we've already mentioned. Your counselor, right? You should be working with them throughout this process. A lot of people have relationships with their counselors. They know what they're doing extracurricular wise. That's a good option. Sometimes principals know who you are too, depending on the size of your school. So, counselor, principal are great options because they can speak to more than just your academics. They can kind of talk a little bit to the leadership aspect if they've seen you active in different extracurriculars. However, because the service academies and the Air Force Academy specifically, you graduate the science or a bachelor's of science and engineering, no matter what your degree's in, chemistry and physics are great options because it's just giving the academy more confidence that you're going to be successful in chemistry and physics. Because one of the questions that they ask are, you're invited to share your impressions of the candidate. Please comment on the candidate's academic performance and his or her potential in your subject area and how he or she compares with the entire class. What traits, either positive or negative, does the candidate possess? What special circumstances in the student's background would help us better understand and appreciate the student's academic or extracurricular performance? So there's a lot of room here for that other evaluator to talk about your, not only your academics but your leadership too. And it kind of, it's almost, it straddles between a an academic evaluation and then like a leadership evaluation too. So I really don't think you can go wrong if you're using one of your those people, those teachers. But I always prefer counselor, principal, or physics or chemistry if the student's not in JROTC.
Right. Yeah, because the JROTC you definitely want to have that one in if you are at least for the Air Force Academy piece of that. But certainly, if you look at Naval Academy, you'd want to probably have that junior ROTC, Naval junior ROTC, or junior ROTC as an optional letter of recommendation. We can talk about optional letters of recommendation here in a second. So great rundown of the Air Force. I mean, we see that it's very similar to the Naval Academy in its kind of what they're looking for, and really West Point is kind of really the same way. They really are very directive in who does the letters of recommendation. You have to have an English teacher, a math teacher, a physics or chemistry teacher, or a gym teacher, but they don't necessarily say that it has to be the 11th or 12th grade. So that gives you a little bit more flexibility here. It doesn't necessarily have to be that. Although I do think, though, if you can get it somebody who can be closer to the what you're going to be doing at West Point, for example, pre-calculus or calculus or AP chemistry or whatever you're doing, I think that can give you a little bit more input than maybe somebody who taught you in ninth grade or 10th grade. So for West Point, they survey you 1 to 5, 1 being strongly agree to 5 strongly disagree. And it really is kind of the same kind of evaluations as other two academies. Things like shows interest and concern for the welfare of others, influences others in a positive manner, sets the example of good conduct, set high standards for your own performance, seeks academic challenges beyond what's required in normal coursework, reaches sound logical conclusions based on analysis or fact, accepts full responsibility for their own actions. And then at the end, they have to do a written evaluation where they tell you how the candidate would perform at the college level in your discipline, which is around 2,000 words, but it doesn't necessarily have to be that long for West Point. So very similar, although it looks like that West Point requires more teachers than the Air Force Academy or the Naval Academy.
Yeah, and it's interesting too that, and I think across all the applications, they give teachers a lot of room to write about you. It's usually about 2,000 words, and that's a lot of space to write. I don't think most teachers end up using that, but giving them an idea of what to write about is a good thing to do. So, I mean, that kind of goes back to sitting down with them and discussing, hey, let's walk through each of these questions and performing at the college level in your discipline, right? What classes are you going to be taking at West Point? Can you tell your teachers that these are the classes I'm going to be enrolled in? Do you think I'm going to do okay? And they can back you up and give you that credibility.
Yeah, say your math teacher is teaching you pre-calculus in 11th grade. And then when you sit down with this teacher, talking to them about all the rest of your stuff that you're doing, you let them know that you're going to be taking at least 3 semesters of calculus. And then you're going to be doing some probability and statistics, perhaps, and then some other types of math based calculus. So when the teacher writes your evaluation, they can write words to the effect of, I'm aware of what the Air Force Academy requires of its cadets in math, and based upon what I've seen from Johnny's performance in pre-calculus, that I believe he'll be able to do both single and multivariable calculus and apply it to the engineering classes that he'll be required to do at the Air Force Academy. It gives the academy the understanding that the teacher knows what Johnny is going to be required to do at the academy. Make sense?
Yeah, it does. And then there's the question of, well, what if my teacher doesn't even know who I am? Right? What can you do if your teacher doesn't even know who you are and really beyond grading your paper? And I think that's where that participation and joining extra tutor, I mean, if they have office hours or something like that, going to those and just taking advantage of those opportunities. So that way you have some sort of relationship with your teacher and you can go in and you can say, this is the curriculum at West Point. Are you willing to write me an evaluation?
Right. So it's kind of the communication back and forth that we're talking about here is making sure that they, understand the questions, understand the curriculum, are able to talk about you effectively. This is a different type of evaluation. You just need to be able to let your teachers know that a little bit more. Let's talk a little bit about the optional letters of recommendation, which the Naval Academy and the Air Force Academy give you an option. Naval Academy, 3 letters; Air Force Academy, 2; West Point, no letters of recommendation other than the evaluation. So, any thoughts on the optional letters of recommendation?
Yeah, you should use every single letter that you can. And I think there's some, we always go back to the scholar athlete leader approach. And if you look at the teacher evaluations, you've already been evaluated in the scholar aspect. So I would really prioritize the athlete and the leader when it comes to your optional letters of recommendation. So specifically coaches, if you're involved in sports, which hopefully you are, any type of work environment that you're in. So your bosses talking about your leadership, but really your coach should be talking about your leadership on and off the field. Your boss can talk about the responsibility that you have, which we've talked about the value of working and having a job and how important that is. I think how students kind of belittle that a little bit. You can go listen to that episode separately. But if you're involved in any military propensity organizations, so Civil Air Patrol, Sea Cadets, Young Marines, Junior ROTC, that if we're not talking about Air Force and there is no JROTC person that's rating you, that should definitely be a letter of recommendation that's submitted. Because the commander of that program's probably former military, current military, one of the two, and they have the idea, they understand what it takes to be a successful leader in the military. And so coming from someone who gets it, or a former military officer that's teaching you that's helping you fly for your private pilot license. There's another option. And whatever the your specific may be, you're going to have adults in your life that you feel like have a really good grasp on who you are, what you stand for, what your core values are, the fact that you're an athlete and a leader and not only a scholar.
Right. So here's a tough question for you. You want to hear a tough question?
Yes.
Okay. If one of the people who are listening to this say, I know a general officer that's a friend of my dad's, or I know a somebody who's, I know the deputy secretary of defense
Mhm.
for underwriting. He will write me a letter of recommendation. Thoughts on that?
So
That's a really tough one, huh?
it is a tough one. I say no to that. And I've advised clients not to use those people before, and they still use them because they feel like the weight behind the name makes a difference. However, the reason I don't like that is because it's pretty clear if the person actually knows you or not. It's pretty like I'm looking for an adult who's supervised you for the last 3 years on the field, sees you day in day out, and can personally vouch for the fact that you care about your teammates, that you're always there for them, that you're going above and beyond, and you're a really good communicator. You lead by example, and you just demonstrate all the core values that the Navy or the Air Force or the Army are looking for. However, I think the one gotcha for that, and it's something that we haven't really talked about, but congressional nominations, sometimes if it's someone that's connected to that person, having a letter of recommendation from them can help. That's really the only time I would suggest using like a person who has connections or is has weight behind their name.
Yep. I think I agree with you completely there. I think it's got to be somebody who knows you. I do think it can help, but you're taking a chance there. It could backfire on you. I can tell you that from my standpoint, that when I see somebody with a letter of recommendation from a general officer or some muckety muck, I think that this person's trying to get over on the system and that this person is trying to utilize their influence to get an advantage over somebody else. That they're and there may be people who are in these committees that are looking at your evaluation that may think that that you're that it's that you're trying to be a weasel,
Hmm.
for lack of a better term. And
Yeah,
and
get
so
advantage.
you don't know how people are going to react to it. They could react very positively to it, or they could react negatively to it. And so why do you want to take that chance?
Hmm.
You don't want to take that chance, in my
Yeah,
opinion, because
I,
you just don't know. And so it's much better just to find somebody a little bit who knows you that can give you a great evaluation. And we talked about this before, Trish, but you can smell BS a mile away with some of this stuff. I mean,
yeah.
it doesn't seem like BS to you. A person who sees hundreds of these applications smells out BS in 2 seconds.
And I mean, here's a question for you, sir. What would you say the overall weight? I mean, what if you just have the best evaluation ever? What is that going to make a difference in your application?
Well, here we are. We talked about how important all these teacher evaluations are and everything, but and then now we have to like go and say how much do they really count? So they're 10% of the overall evaluations for each of the academies. I think Air Force it's estimated to be about 10%, but the issue is that this and Iran did a study on this back in 2015 for the academies, and they did the standard deviation for these teacher evaluations, and the standard deviation is very narrow. So your most people do very well on these evaluations, and it really doesn't move the needle a whole heck of a lot. So having super evaluations is not going to get you over the top. Most people have pretty good evaluations and are right in that center. However, I think where it can hurt you is if you have a bad evaluation. I think that can be something that can eliminate you from consideration. And I remember talking to a Navy ROTC captain who sat some of the naval ROTC boards. Who the naval ROTC is the only ROTC that has teacher evaluations, and he said you would be surprised at how many teachers give poor evaluations to students and how that eliminates students from consideration.
Hmm. I'm surprised that I mean, I if you're gonna be a leader and an officer, I would hope that a student would have the awareness to recognize that they don't have a good relationship with the teacher and to not use that person.
Yeah, I think they just list them down and they assume that the teacher is going to evaluate them positively without ever talking to them.
Hmm.
And so the teacher is gets it, and the student thought they had a great relationship with the teacher, but they didn't. Or maybe the teacher was having a bad day or something and didn't evaluate them. But they are looked at. They are important. You want to make sure that these are good. But as far as like having a super evaluation pushing you over the top, it just doesn't happen because of the standard deviation of these evaluations.
So bottom line is it's really not going to propel you forward, but it could definitely hold you back if you have a bad evaluation. So you want to make sure that they're in line with everybody else.
Yeah. And it adds to the overall feeling of the application. So when you are getting interviewed by a field force person or an ALO or a blue and gold officer, and then it combines with these great evaluations here, what that it paints a picture of the candidate overall. So there's a lot of like subjective things here also that go into this. If you the field force person for West Point says this person's awesome, great leader, and then the teacher evaluations say the same thing, then that paints a very positive picture for the candidate. And so that's why everything needs to be straight to make that kind of positive picture of the candidate. So exactly right, Trish. It doesn't push you over the top. It adds, I think, to already a good file.
Hmm. Yeah. And I think just understanding what's behind the curtain here was our whole goal today so that you understand the steps that you can take now. You know, are you respectful? Are you accepting criticism? Do you make friends easily in class? And demonstrating all of those things because you have the opportunity. It's really up to you to go into your math and your English, your chemistry, physics, your gym class, and to make those good impressions.
Exactly. And so, yep. So you got it right. Keep working on those relationships and keep your teachers in the loop. So until next time, we'll see you.
Awesome.